Hey, in this video, I want to show you a little bit how to make a container view controller. So the example I want to illustrate is this one right here. So this is your classic hamburger menu, no hamburger icon, but it's basically the same effect. And so I have a menu here behind where I can tap on, say, blue or pink to switch kind of these view controllers. So I want to walk through how to implement this as well as discuss any design considerations. So I have here a project, and this project has a few things set up for me. So for example, this thing is my menu view controller. If I just look at it, it's just enough code to display these three cells right here. Then here are the three content view controllers. And so each one of them is embedded in its own navigation controller. So not unlike your typical tab bar controller setup where they each has its own history. So for example, if I click on blue right here, do a bunch of navigation, click on pink here, do a bunch of navigation, the back buttons here, they should be separate. That's why there's a different navigation controller for each one. So if I look into, there's no actual code inside of the colored view controllers here. But inside the menu view controller, I just have an array of my three view controllers. I instantiate them from the storyboard. Then I put them in the array. And then in self row at index path, I just pass back these three things. So that's it. Now, this itself is already kind of a design decision, right? So like for a situation like this hamburger view controller, where do the view controllers belong? And I'm going to discuss this in a minute. So first, if I come to my hamburger view controller, I'm starting off with an empty class right now. So before we kind of get into some of the design discussions, let's just get it a little bit working and then start with a basic version. So I'm going to click on this storyboard here, and I'm going to look at my empty hamburger view controller. So the first thing is that storyboard does not have great support for view controller containment. For example, an example of containment is me coming into here and grabbing like the two existing container view controllers. For example, a tab bar controller, right? We're essentially designing a tab bar controller right now. And then example of support for containment would be like if I can control drag here, you see how there's this relationship segue? So there's no way to define custom relationship segues, which would allow us to do cool things like this, which can more like formally define the relationship between my view controllers, my container view controllers and the child view controllers. So unfortunately, I can't do that. And so I just kind of space them apart in storyboard, and then I have to do the linking in code. So here's my hamburger view controller. And so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out a space for this menu view and this content view. So what follows is kind of a pattern that I do. It's not like a strict requirement, but I'll kind of explain why I do it. So I'm going to create a view that I plan to put the menu in. So I'm going to put another view here just right on top of it. And I see this is nested, so I don't quite want that. So I have them here. Let me just double check. They're both at 0, 0 and 0, 0. And so this one's going to be behind, so I'm going to call this one the menu view. And this one's in front, so I'm going to call this the content view. So I don't need to create these views when you're doing container view controllers. So the whole point of container view controllers is that you're defining a view controller whose job is to contain multiple view controllers as well as the interaction between them. But that's pretty much it, right? So for example, if I was doing the Safari container where the pages slide up in front of it, my view controller should contain those array of websites that I've gone to. So I'd like to create these like little placeholder. I think of them as like iframes. And the reason why I like to keep them is it's very easy to bookkeep putting views inside of these container views. So I'm gonna create a outlet here. For the menu view and the content view. So if I create an outlet like this, menu view, and then create an outlet here for this content view. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to set a color to these views just so that I can double check my gestures here. So I'm going to maybe make the background a light color, and then the content view a light color, and then the menu view a dark color. And then I want to implement the basic thing, which is just this gesture. So before I do that, I'm going to set my auto layout constraints. So for this content view, normally what I would do in a situation like this is I would put margins all around. But I don't quite want that in this case because I'm going to be moving this view around, so I actually don't want the margins to be all zero, but I somehow need to kind of respect the width of the phone. So the way that I'm going to do that instead is the top and the bottom will still be fixed. And I do want this left constraint, but instead of having a right constraint, I'm going to say that it has equal widths with this view. So I'm going to click on both of these, and then I'm going to say that these should have equal widths. Right, so if I have a wider phone, this will grow correctly. For the menu doesn't move, but I do want it to grow with the phone, so I'll just put zeros all the way around here. Now, in order to support dragging, of course, I'm going to put a pan gesture recognizer on top of this content view. So pan gesture recognizer goes on the content view. Oops, I have two of these, so on pan gesture. So this one goes to the content view. And then I'm going to create the action. So on pan gesture, and then create this as the UI pan gesture recognizer. So when you're in auto layout world, normally what I would do is I would change the frame of my content view. You can't do that in auto layout. Instead, you have to modify these constraints. So here, I'm going to create a constraint to this leading, and I'm essentially just going to change the left margin. So here is the left margin constraint. And then in here, I can just implement my pan gesture. So let me grab my translation. Sender.translation in view. So this view, you can pass in any view in here, but the view that you pass in will define where 0, 0 is. So which view should I use for my coordinate system? So I have another view right here. And then my gesture state methods. So on the begin state, I just want to capture where I began dragging. So I'm going to save in here my original left margin. And I'll just have that be a CG float. So when the gesture begins, I just capture that. And then inside of here, I kind of like, I can think of it and visualize kind of like tugging it as if you have a string attached to it. So left margin constraint.constant is equal to whatever my original one was, plus the translation in Y, in X. So if I run this, then what I would hope to see is I should see my like dark gray screens. So I'm going to clear this out. I should see my kind of light gray screen on top of my dark gray screen. Okay, and then so already I have dragging working. As I release it, I can see that I don't quite have the behavior that I want. It just kind of stays there. So for my Hamburger view controller, if if I'm dragging and I'm going to look at my velocity here. So if I'm dragging in the, I guess this direction, I want it to close the menu if I lift up my finger. If I'm dragging in this direction, which is positive Y, I want to open it. So this is opening, and then this is closing. So I'm going to say when closing is easier, closing is just setting it back to 0. And then opening it, I mean, you can set it equal to, say, I should probably put this as a constant somewhere, but the size of the view minus however much I want it to peek out. So this will cause it to snap on the ending state of the gesture. So while that's loading, I'm going to go ahead and add animation. So this is just going to run with no animation. Actually, it looks like it might have died, so. Okay, so if I open this, then it'll snap here. If I close this, it'll snap closed. And so if I want to animate this, UIView.animate, I'll use these methods. And then let's just say choose an animation. And I'll put this in here. And the way that you animate auto layout is like, once again, I can't change the frame within auto layout. Instead, I change these constraints. And then I call self.view.layout if needed. So the view that you call is technically the parent of the one whose constraints you're changing. So if I run this now, then if I open this, I can see that it should animate on open and close. So this is kind of the easy part of doing container view controllers, which is just defining what the interaction should be. So the bulk of the logic inside a container view controller should be around bookkeeping, like this behavior. The next thing that we're going to design, and this is kind of the trickier part, is setting up the other interactions, right? Like I want my menu to be here, and I want my content view controllers here, and I need to design the interface. So that's what I'm going to do next. So next what I want to do is I just want to place that menu behind this view. So in order to do that, because Storyboard doesn't support container view controllers, I have to switch into code. And so I need to get a handle to that existing Storyboard. So what I'd like is to get a handle to the Hamburger view controller, which is right now just the initial view. So let Hamburger view controller equal to window.root view controller as Hamburger view controller. Now what I'd like to be able to do is give it that menu view controller. So let me create a menu view controller first. So I need the storyboard. So let storyboard equal to UI storyboard, and then instantiate from that. So storyboard.instantiate. So I've already given it an identifier in the storyboard called MenuViewController. So now I kind of have this view controller floating in space right now. And what I'd like to be able to do, I can't do it yet, but what I'd like to be able to do is say Hamburger view controller dot menu view controller equal to menu view controller. I can't do this yet because Hamburger view controller doesn't support this. So I'm going to add that. So Hamburger view controller, I come in here and I say, well, var menu view controller, which is just a UI view controller. and I kind of have this stored property. But if I do this, then that's not gonna magically put me into this view. So instead, what I want to do is I'm going to create a property observer. So did set that says, hey, whenever you set the menu view controller, then take that menu view controller and put it into my view hierarchy. So this is kind of the beauty of the container view controller system. It's actually a very, very straightforward concept. If I want multiple view controllers in the same view, I just grab their views and put them into my view hierarchy as the container view controller. So for example, menu view dot add subview, and this is why I like setting up these little containers, these little iframes, so to speak, of menu view controller dot view. Right, so you can actually pull out the view attached to a view controller, and then after that, you're kind of good to go. So if I run this, I think I'm going to notice an issue here. So I get a nil exception. I can see that my menu view is nil. In other words, that this thing wasn't quite ready yet when I set this property menu view controller. So I could do a lot of things. I could refactor this so that this has the setup, but then I have to make sure to call that within view did load as well. So instead, I'm gonna cheat a little bit and just kind of do something the easy way, where I'm gonna say view dot layout if needed. So the layout if needed part is irrelevant. It's just the fact that I invoked this property view, which is kind of a lazy property. As soon as I invoke it, then that's going to kick this view process to begin, and actually view did load will get called even before this line 23. So if I run this now, then I can see that my menu view is now behind here. So what I'd like to do now is, if I click on any one of these, if I tap on any one of these, then that's going to change this right-hand side. So if I come back to this menu view controller, what that means is I need to implement the did select method. So table view did select row index path, and maybe the first thing that I'll do is I'll just unselect. I'll deselect the row just for appearances, just so I can unselect this animation here, index path, animated true. And then somehow here, what I want to do is set the content view of the Hamburger view controller. So I need to somehow give access to the Hamburger view controller from here. So I'm going to create a property here, var Hamburger view controller. And you're probably thinking this is a little bit weird, and I'm gonna kind of defend this decision in a second. So for now, I'm gonna say Hamburger view controller. Actually, I have to actually tell it that it's specifically a Hamburger view controller because I need to access special properties of it. And I want to be able to say, so grab my view controllers. I want to be able to say Hamburger view controller dot content view controller equals view controllers index path dot row. I can't do this yet because content view controller doesn't exist, but this is what I'd like to be able to do. So if I come back to Hamburger view controller, then I'm going to create another variable, content view controller, UI view controller, and then kind of do the same thing here. So I'll say content view, add subview, content view controller dot view. So let's see what happens here. So if I go back here, I click on, say, green. I see that my Hamburger view controller is actually, so let's see here. So my Hamburger view controller is actually nil, right? Because in my app delegate, I sent one direction, but not the other. So here, now that I've told the Hamburger menu who its menu view controller is, now I need to tell its menu view controller who the Hamburger view controller is. So now that I've established this kind of like two-way street, if I click on green, blue, pink, I can see that it's actually adding the subview. And in real life, I should be bookkeeping this a little bit better. Right now, I'm just stacking the views and calling add subview constantly. The other two are actually still behind there, which is not the best practice. I should be removing them. And when I call add subview on a view that's already in the view hierarchy, it doesn't add it twice. It just moves it to the very top. So this kind of works, except I noticed that I would probably prefer to close this menu when that is set. So I'm going to augment my Hamburger view controller to do that. So Hamburger view controller, and I'll just, I could create a close method, but I'm just going to do this right here. So I could refactor this into a closed menu. So I'll just create a new UI view.animate. Same duration. Get this. And then do a self.view.layout if needed. So now if I open this up and tap green, blue, pink, then I can see that it's setting up the content view controller. So what's next? Because it looks like we're already pretty far advanced. Well, there was the initial view controller, right? So let's take care of that. So if I go to menu view controller, maybe on boot up, I want to say Hamburger view controller dot content view controller is equal to, say, maybe the green navigation controller. And so let's see what's causing this problem. So if I look at the Hamburger view controller, I can see that it's going to be nil. So if I look at the app delegate, I think I'll see why, which is I'm setting the menu view controller of the Hamburger view first. So instead, I'm going to set this first. And this is bad, right? I mean, it's bad to have a design that crashes depending on the order of these two lines. But I'm going to kind of discuss what our options are in a minute. So now I see that my initial view controller is set up correctly, blue and then pink. So I think we're pretty much done. Now I want to kind of explain a little piece of complexity here. So this is the easy version of container view controllers. Now there's something special that we have to do to support kind of best behaviors for child view controllers. Now, if my menu view controller, like for example, what do you think would happen if a second menu view controller gets set? For the content view controller, we're not really doing any bookkeeping here with the content view controllers as it's switching. And even worse, as you may know, view controllers have these view lifecycle methods. So view did load, view will appear, view did appear, and so on. The con of doing this is we're yanking this view away from the content view controller. The content view controller has no real awareness that we're doing that, as you can kind of tell, right? How could it? And so in order to support these view lifecycle methods as well as these view rotation methods, there's actually an extra set of things that we have to do. So for that purpose, when you're adding a subview like this, what you want to do is you're supposed to say content view controller, you're about to move to this parent view controller. And then in this content view, you add the subview. So this line will call will appear. And then after your animation, so in this case, we want to just do this immediately because it's going to be visible immediately. So if I click blue, it's actually, even though there's an animation of this closing, because blue is visible immediately, I also want to call did appear. So content view controller dot did move to parent controller self. So you have to do this for both the content view controller as well as the menu view controller. And not only that, but you have to remove the previous view controller. So for example, if I have did set, and then here I have the old content view controller, then if this old content view controller is around, then in here, I also want to say old content view controller dot will move to parent view controller nil. And so this is just documented in the container view controller guide from Apple. They're just under the hood. They're just expecting this. And then old content view controller dot view dot remove from super view. And then finally, old content view controller dot did move to view controller no. So if I run this, and from our perspective, nothing much will change, except it's actually been removed from the view hierarchy. And now that we've added these methods, you should get proper bookkeeping for. There's also view rotation methods that get called. That's part of the view controller lifecycle. So just to kind of wrap up, let's discuss the design that we have here. So there's pros and cons to this design. So the pro of this design is that inside of the Hamburger view controller, it's actually pretty agnostic. Even though I called it menu view and menu view controller, it's actually pretty agnostic to what this left view controller is, right? And so in some libraries you can see that people have they just call it the left view controller, and they even have the option to give you a right view controller. The kind of con of this approach is there's two. So in the menu view controller, the stuff that's in here has to be repeated every time you use this Hamburger view controller. So you have to remember to do this, to set up this initial view controller here on line 38. And you also have to handle this selection yourself. So the reason that I am proposing this thing, so the alternative is like you can make your Hamburger view controller really what I call menu aware. So in other words, so here the menu view controller owns this array of view controllers. I could say Hamburger view controller and give it an array of view controllers, and it can render itself on the menu. So for example, tab bar does this, right? In a tab bar, you say, let's compare the instantiation of a tab bar. So I would say, let tab bar controller equal to UI tab bar controller. And then what I'm supposed to do for tab bars is tab bar controller dot view controllers, and I give it an array right here of view controllers. And then what its expectation is that each view controller, let's say menu view controller, has a property called tab bar item. And the purpose of that tab bar item is just to declare how it should be visualized in the tab bar. So you can imagine doing something similar. You could say Hamburger view controller dot view controllers equals this, and then you could have some expectation of that view controller so that you maybe you kind of take over the usage of this tab bar item and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to use this the title and the item icon here to style this menu. Or you create your own. You can call it like a menu item, and then augment the view controller, UI view controller in an extension, and give it a property called menu item. And then it'll expect that menu item is somehow configured to configure its appearance there. And so the benefit of that is the setup is much more straightforward, right? So you don't have this vulnerability where, the order is dependent here. And in fact, look at all this boilerplate just to set this up, right? So the con of this is the same con that tab bar controller actually has, which is tab bar controller. Hey, it's very easy to set up, but as you know, if you don't like the configuration of the tab bar, there's not a lot of flexibility in changing it. And so that's why most people have ended up implementing their own tab bar controller, because the design of this wasn't really flexible for the appearance and behavior of this. And so in my experience, for every designer that uses Hamburger menu controllers, they have a little bit of their fun little tweaks to the menu, whether it's this, but then there's a custom header view that's here, or whether there's just like additional like behaviors here that's kind of custom. So I like exposing it in this way because I always end up having to have a pretty custom menu view controller anyway. And so even though there is some reusable stuff here, I think it is pretty relatively light. And this hands you full control of the table view, the layout of this view, outside of the Hamburger view controller. So another thing that you can do is another thing that you may be wondering is weird is that there's a dual link here, right? So the menu view controller has the Hamburger view controller and vice versa. So in other words, the container view controller has a handle to the child, but the child also has a view to the container view controller. Now, this is actually standard too. So if I look at any view controller, I can see that it actually has a setup pointer for these particular container view controllers, the tab bar controller and the navigation controller. And in fact, you often need to do things with this. So if I want to be able to programmatically click on the tab bar, I can do that. Or for the navigation controller, I can push an additional view controller onto the screen. So I guess I would argue that this pattern where they have this dual relationship is standard. The thing that is weird is the orders in this case was kind of dependent. And so in the setup of tab bar controllers, the expectation is that the container view controller is created first. And then secondly, like for example, if this was a navigation controller, let navigation controller equal to UI navigation controller. Their way of getting around this is that navigation controllers actually require a root view controller, and then you have to pass it in at this moment. And so the benefit of this, of creating an initializer like this, and this is something that we could do, right, is that you don't get this vulnerability with order. So that's the basic design of the Hamburger view controller, and it's a pretty great example of how you design an average container view controller. This isn't like the canonical way. There's actually a million ways to do this, but this is just one argument for doing it this way.